What was your first introduction to cannabis, whether it was hearing about it or consuming it yourself? I'm Therese Bowers, and I'm the founder and program director of the Cannabis Informed Practitioner Program. And this video series is called The Cannabis Conversations That We're Not Having. So I want to dive into conversations around cannabis that we're not largely having in our culture right now, but very much influence our connection to cannabis. My first interaction with cannabis was very maybe different than typically how people come to cannabis. I grew up in a religious culture that did not recognize cannabis in any of its capacities. I actually didn't even hear about it until in my later 20s and 30s. And it wasn't until my mid-30s that I actually consumed cannabis for the first time. I was called into relationship by the cannabis plant. So that was cannabis that called me. I was having some health challenges, and there was just this calling of try cannabis. And that's when I began to explore cannabis. And right away I started out with a relationship that was grounded in curiosity and wanting to know more about this sacred plant. And so I come from that lens of being growing up in a culture where cannabis wasn't even present, wasn't even recognized, into now where I see how this plant can work with us in so many variety of ways when we develop a good right relationship with it. So this topic today we're going to talk about is the stigma that we don't talk about. So what is stigma, and what is it that surrounds cannabis so heavily into this aspect of stigma? We have cultural, we have religious, we have societal stigma that has been attached to cannabis over the last 100 years. And really, it's only been 100 years. Prior to that, prior to criminalization of cannabis in the 1920s, cannabis was a plant that was used largely in our pharmacopoeia. It was even in the pharmacopoeia in the 1800s up until the early 1900s. We utilized cannabis for all sorts of medical conditions and support. Prior to that, many cultures utilized cannabis for spiritual and sacraments and for communing with divine through that way. And so we have really based our current relationships with cannabis on the past 100 years. So if we go way back and we just kind of put that on pause, these past 100 years, and how we have really bastardized the plant and butchered it and changed how we work with it and changed how we communicate with it and commune with it in culture, and move back to the original ways of how cannabis was utilized in our way of life. And I encourage you to do a little bit of research. There's lots out there. And even as far as the Bible times, people are doing some deep dives into how cannabis might have been a part of those earlier Old Testament times, and how the smoke from cannabis was utilized in a really sacred and holy way. How can we do that now in our current lives? And how can we shift this cultural understanding of cannabis as a drug, cannabis as a way of promoting unmotivation and laziness, and cannabis as a way of escaping, cannabis as a way of using and abusing her to the point where our relationships are dysregulated. And this all stems from the stigma and through these cultural institutions that have taught us that this plant is not a good plant for us. But when we really look at the foundation of this plant and how it works and interacts with our bodies, it actually blends in quite well through a system in our bodies called the endocannabinoid system. So this is a system within our body that was discovered in the late 80s, early 90s. And it's an important system just as much as the cardiovascular system or the respiratory system. And its whole function within the body is to bring balance and homeostasis. If we have a system within our body that focuses on bringing balance and homeostasis to all the other systems of the body, why don't we look to that one first when we're finding dis-ease within the other systems within the body? This is where I'm really curious about. How do we support the endocannabinoid system first before moving on to other systems? And so when we look at how this plant works within the endocannabinoid system, it binds into the receptors within our body that help to bring balance and homeostasis. We make cannabinoids within our own bodies. So does the cannabis plant makes cannabinoids within our bodies. And the cannabinoids that our body makes are intended to help us be in this place of bliss and ease within our body. When our bodies are balanced and in homeostasis, we can flow with that much more ease and with that much more grace. We can reach those states of joy and of blissfulness and of ease. And sometimes when we are not able to reach that within our own bodies, maybe we have a deficiency in the cannabinoids that our bodies are producing. The cannabinoids from cannabis actually bind into these same receptors and can help mimic our cannabinoids that are created within the body. So was cannabis created to be a partner to us? Maybe. It does certainly work alongside with us, but in right relationship. And when we address these areas of stigma and cultural teachings that have distorted our perception of cannabis and distorted our relationship. So when we look at our own story of cannabis and how we came to cannabis, it really can impact the way that we talk to other people about cannabis and their relationships, about how we as practitioners are working with our clients. If a client comes into our practice and talks about their cannabis experience or how they are working with cannabis, how do we respond to them? And how does our story, our own personal story, inform our biases around cannabis? These are important things to look at and to uncover is how is it that we are thinking and communing with cannabis. And I'm not saying that we have to all consume cannabis. It's not about that. We can have a relationship with plants even if we don't consume them. We can sit with them, we can tend them in the garden, we can share their medicine, we can share their benefits, we can share their support, we can be a plant ally without ever having to consume the plant. But what I'm interested in is transforming how we interact with this plant and how we bring back right relationship and how we look at the stigmas that our culture has imposed on us and how this whole reefer madness and how the culture has dictated that, crazy things will happen when we consume cannabis. And we do see that in our culture. And are we inviting that in? Or are we inviting the healing properties and capabilities of cannabis into our being? So I invite you to sit with this and sit with how you were informed about cannabis. And are there some truths and some education where things and perspectives could be shifted? And again, I'm not saying you have to consume cannabis. You don't have to have that kind of relationship. And also, if you do want to consume cannabis, there is a way to work through a good and right relationship with our plant. So this is the stigma that we have grown into, been born into, and we'll be diving into more about this in our Cannabis Informed Practitioner program. So if this is appealing to you and you're curious about our culture and where we've gone with cannabis, I invite you to stay to the end of the video series where we'll be talking more about stigma. Stay tuned to part 2 for our next video where we will be talking about the relationship with cannabis that we don't talk about.